No one is broken. You have nothing wrong with you. You've just got into some habits, and habits are 100% changeable no matter how long you've had them for or where you're at with them now.
You are listening to The Dr. Haley Show, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your health. Each episode, there will be an interview or a message to help you discover better health. We will be featuring health radicals on the show to bring new ideas to the table, as well as doubling down on key fundamentals to support you living your best life. Your host is no other than the founder of Haley Nutrition, Dr. Michael Haley.
This is the Dr. Haley Show podcast. Today's guest, Amber Abila, helps people stop binge eating and overeating by rewiring their brains so they can feel normal and in control around any food. Through coaching and psychology, she learned that there was nothing wrong with her, and she just needed some simple brain tools to start making dramatic shifts in her eating habits and life. She now walks others step by step through her process in her Confident Eater program, as well as her top-rated podcast, Become a Confident Eater. She also has a wonderful YouTube channel and website, theconfidenteater.org, and we're even going to have a special offer for our listeners today. Amber, I want to thank you for joining me on the Dr. Haley Show podcast. I think this is going to be one of those topics that everyone can relate to. I think we've all done our share of overeating at one point in time. How did you get into this? And I guess you had some struggles at some point.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I always joke and say, this wasn't necessarily my dream career, but it is my dream career now, because I struggled with food for so long myself that I knew when I got out of it, I wanted to help other people. And so a little bit about my journey and story. It started, I think, pretty innocently, as most people's health journey does, where I decided I wanted to lose some weight. I wanted to slim up a bit. And so I went to the internet and I came across calorie counting, and it seemed to make sense. Calories in, calories out. I just needed to eat less and move a little bit more, and then I would lose weight. And I did. So I started using my MyFitnessPal, religiously tracking each bite of food that I put in my mouth. But then slowly over time, it started to become more and more of an obsession that no matter how much weight I lost, I kept wanting to lose more, because I thought the more weight I lost, the more worthy I'd be, the more people would love me, the more friends I'd have, and all those things that we know maybe aren't necessarily true, but we think in the back of our head. So I continued to religiously count my calories, but then I started to have these binges. And that was because I was severely under eating. At that time, I was usually eating between 1,000 and 1,200 calories, which is the amount that a 2-year-old toddler needs, not a grown adult woman. And unfortunately, that's like the advice though, is eat 1,200 calories, but that can often be way too big of a calorie deficit, and that can put our brain into survival mode. Our brain does not know that we're just trying to be hot and thin and sexy. Our brain thinks, hey, there must be a famine going around and the food must be disappearing off the face of the earth. So let's make sure we don't die and we get as much in as possible. So I thought I was just going crazy around food, and I thought I just needed to cut back my calories more. So then it went to the other side where it increased the cycle even more, because then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm having these big binges at night. I got to eat even less during the day. So I continued to eat less, but binge more, and I got really caught in this cycle. So after that was going on for a couple of years, I started learning more about how dieting impacts our brain, and again, how restriction is something that's really hard to fight, and our brain is very smart, and it knows when we're under eating, and it wants to make sure that we get enough food. So I slowly stopped restricting, but I was still binge eating, and I was really confused because everywhere on the internet, I saw people saying, if you're binge eating, you just need to eat more. And I was eating more, and then I thought, well, what's going on here? And so I started to dive into the psychology of habits and how our brain forms habits. And what I learned is that it's very easy for our brain to form habits in any area, but particularly around food, because it starts to think that this is a habit we need to survive. So I learned that my brain was interpreting binge eating as a necessary survival thing, even though I knew logically, I don't need to eat 5,000 calories a day. That's clearly too much for my body. Because I had done it so many times, my brain started to think, oh, this is a habit I need.
Yeah. Well, let's get an understanding of who this podcast is for, because, we're talking about an eating disorder, and there's a lot of eating disorders. who is this for and who is it not for? And at what point do people need medical help?
Yeah, great question. So I work with people who are both binge eating and overeating because I found myself often in between this fine line. So binge eating, to be classified as a true binge eating disorder, which is a medically recognized eating disorder, you need to eat a larger amount of food than most people would consider normal, which is like in and of itself very subjective, within a 2-hour time frame for I think like more than 3 days a week for 3 months or something like that. And so it is quantifiable, but it's also very subjective. It's like, well, is 3 cookies more than most people would consider normal, or is 10 cookies more than most people would consider normal? And binge eating is often done in this way that feels very fast and out of control. I used to feel like I was out of my body, and then I would wake up once all the wrappers were around me and I was just sitting there like, oh no, I did it again. I felt like I was not present in any way, shape, or form when it was happening. But yes, if you are struggling with binge eating, technically it is a recognized eating disorder. But that's where I myself went to therapy first. And that's where a lot of people go. And therapy can be helpful for so many things. But unfortunately, in the binge eating world, I think the research is very lacking on binge eating and how to solve it, because it's only been actually in the last 10 years, binge eating wasn't recognized as an eating disorder until 2013. It was put in the DSM-5. So because of that,
Okay.
it's only been around for 10 years. If you get any classically trained therapists before 10 years ago, they weren't even taught about binge eating in school. So it has a lot more misinformation out there that I think most people realize. And I think a lot of people can get caught in the cycle of, I need to go to therapy, but it's not really helping. And that's where exploring something else like coaching can be helpful.
Yeah, I know that, years ago, I knew people that struggled with the binge and purge, and that being
Mhm.
a definite recognized disorder. And those people would consume so much and then purge it all out and never
Mhm.
actually get the nutrition from it,
Mhm.
which they'd often have some of the same symptoms as being anorexic and
Mhm.
not consuming enough nutrients.
Mhm.
Because they were consuming them, but they just weren't leaving them in their body where they would actually benefit
Mhm.
from any of the nutrition.
Mhm.
And those people, if you're listening to this, you might need some medical intervention. You might need, a doctor visit and some blood measurements and making sure you're getting your
Mhm.
nutrition, and then learn how to deal and cope with this. We can also be applying the same things to medication or alcohol use and thinking, oh, I
Mhm.
binge drink.
Mhm.
Well, we're not going to say these things that we talk about today are going to help you, but they might. But
Mhm.
some people might actually need professional counsel. But with that, I think we can all relate to what you described at some point in time, looking in the mirror, thinking, I can do better, cutting our calories down, and then getting to the point where we just have to eat. And we essentially triggered ourselves to need to consume all of these calories because our body was crying
Mhm.
out for what it was lacking. I think we can all
Mhm.
relate to that. I think we probably all have some degree of that in us. Is that a fair
Mhm.
assessment? Do you see that in, your
Yeah.
friends?
I mean, yes, like when I came out with my business and I started talking about this online, it blew me away how many of my friends said they could relate to me. And we were all struggling with something similar, maybe not the exact same, but struggling with some sort of aspect of our relationship with food, but none of us talked about it with each other. And that's one of my main missions that I aim to accomplish today, is really helping people feel less alone in this, because I think there's a very underserved population of people who you're not trying to lose weight anymore. Like, you're not like, all right, I'm gonna diet, but then you're also not trying to be super strict, because you've seen that backfire where, if you try to do just, I'm only gonna eat clean, I'm only gonna eat these healthy foods, and then all of a sudden, well, what happens when you go to the birthday party or you go to the wedding and you want to eat the cake, but you don't know how to eat the cake because you've never interacted with it in a healthy way. So I noticed with myself and with my friends too, on how there was like this middle ground of people who, maybe occasionally binged, and you had those like crazy times where you had 7 cookies and you went a little crazy. But then there might have been the other days too where you just felt like I don't really feel comfortable going out to eat because I'm nervous that they won't have the type of food, they don't have the salad that I want, and I'll have to eat a burger, and that kind of makes me anxious. And all of these different aspects of our relationship with food that people don't really know how to navigate. And we're only taught the actions of, well, just like eat healthier, or just loosen up your rules a little bit. Just do 80-20. That's one I hear a lot. Just 80% healthy, 20% not so healthy. But no one actually knows how to do that. And no one addresses the mindset around our food. It's all just like chew gum around it, or, call a friend, take a bubble bath, do 80-20, have some foods in moderation. But everyone's confused. Well, how do I actually shift my mindset away from all of this diet culture learnings that I've learned of all or nothing and into this place of moderation? And one of the reasons that can be really hard too is because of when our brain forms habits. So going back to this, is I started learning a lot about our urges. And our urges are this really strong feeling we get right before we do a habit, usually a habit we don't want to do. So this is actually a similarity between people who are overeating or binge eating or binge drinking. Of course, like get medical help when there's a lot of substances involved. But at the end of the day, these urges are the problem, because there's a big difference between people who binge eat and don't. And the people who binge eat have urges and the other people don't. They just don't have the desire to do it. The people who binge drink, they have urges to binge drink, and people who drink casually, they just don't. They just have one and move on. And so I really learned that it was the urges around these foods that were the problem versus the foods themselves.
You enjoying the show thus far? One of the many health secrets that we have covered on the show is all around aloe vera, specifically drinking raw aloe vera. Our aloe vera has helped our customers effectively heal their gut, increase their intestine health, lower inflammation in the body, eliminate and/or decrease acid reflux, have glowing skin and hair, and so much more. Now, as a frequent member of our audience, you will be exposed to exclusive specials and coupon codes for the awesome products manufactured by Haley Nutrition. That's right, for simply being awesome and tuning in, you can get a mini discount to help you optimize and better your health. To see how we can help and support you on your health journey, tune into the episodes and listen for coupon codes that you can use at www.haleynutrition.com before you make your orders of raw aloe vera. Once again, it's www.haleynutrition.com. Now, back to the show.
Where do you think that's coming from? And, educate me from a perspective of how your generation is different than mine. I'm the baby boomer generation. And, we have kids your age, and they are being exposed to, different lifestyle than I was when I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand how that is affecting you and the urges you have, and, how you're exposed to different triggers and things like that I wasn't, so I could understand how I can help my kids.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think it's so much as a generational difference as much as it is maybe our understanding of the human brain has evolved, because we used to think that by the age of 5, your human brain was formed. And that was just that you were just the way you were, and however you were raised, good luck, because that's how you're going to be the rest of your life. And what we now know about the brain is that our brain is neuroplastic, and it can change at any age, meaning that you can be 90 years old and change a habit overnight. You can do these things that you never thought were possible because our brain is constantly adapting and learning. And this is a survival mechanism too, because if our brain were truly to stay the same after the age of 5, we would never be curious and interested in learning more and adapting. Or if our environment changed around us, we have to change our habits. We have to be flexible and adaptable. So it is actually favorable for our brain to know how to change very quickly and adapt to different situations. And so with our knowledge about the brain now and how easily we can actually change it, and I say easily with the right techniques, it can feel hard to change a habit too. Like, we'll acknowledge that, especially if you've been in these eating habits for 10, 20, 30, 50, 60 years, it does take some time and effort. But I think really taking this perspective that our brains can change, and whatever habits we have, we're not stuck in, is a different perspective than sometimes older generations have. We have these sayings like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And that's just not true. Is really anyone can change their brain at any age, because we're made to change, and we're changing every single moment of every day.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think we're also somewhat programmed to think that we can't. And we do get in that, this is how things are, and this is how my brain works. Obviously, there's things we can do to make changes. But I'm still concerned about breaking some of the habits, some of the programming that has been done. For instance, did you go to a private or public school? And what did you do for lunches?
hmm I went to a public high school. Yeah. And for
Eh,
lunches, I luckily lived really close to my high school, so I was able to walk home and get my own lunch. But I know in middle school and stuff, when I lived further, I would usually either get school lunch or I'd have to make my lunch for myself because my parents didn't want to make it.
Well, yeah, but in those, we're kind of programmed that this is what you eat and this is how much you eat. Um,
hmm
Something that's more common today, and I saw one of your podcasts where you had talked about this. Um, and my children have the same situation. I grew up, my parents stayed together, and we had family meals, and I kind of learned how to eat from them. There's a lot more broken,
hmm
divorced families now. A lot of kids that are traveling house to house with their luggage, not really
hmm
having a home, and
hmm
they maybe have some input on how to eat at this home and maybe some here, or maybe they kind of just fend for themselves and
hmm
are spending some of their own money buying their food. That's not how I
hmm
grew up.
hmm
My parents taught me how to eat. They taught me about food. They taught me what they thought was healthy. And we didn't have, sodas and junk food in our house.
hmm
I kind of feel like that is very different today compared to what kids are being exposed to now.
hmm Yeah, are you talking about like the increase of processed foods and like the lack of family dinners and structure around that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that is definitely a factor in it and definitely something we don't want to ignore how I mean the lack of the family dinner alone that's going to teach us to well what do? We eat in front of the TV as quickly as we can so we can get to soccer practice or everyone is just doing their own thing. So we're not really learning then mindful eating, which is a big skill that I teach which is so important for our digestion, for our ability to hear our hunger and fullness signals for just so much of our eating. Because if you think about it like when we're watching TV, it's really easy for our brain to go in fight or flight mode because there's like a big drama scene that's happening. Oh no, what's happening? And our brain turns off our logical conscious brain when we're watching TV. That's why we're able to watch it. We're not thinking, oh, these are actors, this isn't real. We turn off our conscious brain so we can allow our unconscious brain to have the fun with the drama and the fear and the excitement. And when we're going through that range of emotions and we're also trying to eat, we're not going to be very present with the food and we're essentially inducing emotional eating happening in that moment too. So I definitely recommend creating a regular meal schedule that is mindful and really intentional. And that can be part of, okay, if you have kids, let's sit down for dinner every night and let's teach how we communicate over dinner. And dinners are a time to connect and bond and enjoy our food, not a time to disconnect and zone out from our body and our life. And so I think that can be a big part of it. Now, the increase in processed foods, that definitely can be a problem. I think where I specialize more in is the generational dieting effects that especially women have had on their children. So if you look at older generations who grew up with a lot of these stricter diets, luckily things are changing and people are not so much in tune with like Atkins and keto. And I feel like people are starting to move away from that. But then we have, of course, Ozempic and GLP-1s that are coming into the picture that are a whole new ball game. But when, let's say as a daughter or a son, you see your mom constantly dieting and she's constantly either being good and on plan and then maybe the house is filled with healthy foods. And then you see her the next night taking the chips and shoving them in as quickly as possible. You learn then when you see that or hear about that, well, chips are something that are bad and off limits. And when I get access to them, I better eat them as quickly as possible. So we're being modeled secret eating. We're being modeled all or nothing thinking. And we're not being modeled this healthy relationship with food that's balanced. Another big thing I see is when people tell their kids, we have to eat all the good foods and be healthy before you get the dessert. That automatically puts dessert on this higher level pedestal of something that's special that I don't get until I have to get all this other boring stuff. So then we learn, oh, this stuff is boring and gross, and this stuff is delicious and good. And that mindset can stay with us. And so something I teach my clients when we're learning to relearning how to eat these foods in moderation is I actually teach them to put dessert on their plate with everything else. Because of course, like cake and cookies and these desserts, they're different nutritionally. This is not me saying that these foods are good for us or healthy or we should be eating them all the time, but they are the same morality wise. You are not a better or worse person for having a cookie or not. But when we see that like our mom feels so guilty because, oh my gosh, I ate so much last night and I'm not gonna be able to wear my swimsuit. I don't want to go swimming with the kids now because I feel really bad about my body. We learn that we're a bad person for eating these things. And that's when the guilt and shame sets in. And when we feel guilty and shameful, our behavior is based off of that. And so that's normally where we hide, we eat in secret, we eat really fast, and then we feel really shitty about ourselves. And we don't want to do anything positive versus if we get rid of that guilt and say shame and say, you know what, I'm allowed to have a cookie. I'm going to enjoy it. This food is neutral. I'm not a better or worse person for having it. Then we can just move on. And that actually creates better health outcomes than trying to be perfect with our foods and eat clean all the time.
How many meals should have dessert after them?
You know, it's up to the person. I actually teach something called my trigger food process in my program, where in the beginning for a couple of weeks, I actually have them include dessert at like 1 to 3 meals a day. And that might sound crazy at first, but this does something really miraculous to our mindset, which is you have a point in time where you get tired of it. You start to notice, I don't actually want to eat a cookie right now. That just doesn't sound great. And when you can notice that your body actually has that wisdom and it will tell you to stop and you aren't actually addicted to foods and want to eat them forever and ever and ever, you have this insight of, oh my gosh, I can choose. I'm the one in charge. These cookies aren't controlling me. I get to decide that I want one. It's delicious. And then I can move on because the truth is I don't actually want more than one because then I feel really bad in my body. So we learned that at first, but then over time, like I still have dessert every day. Most days I would say, it's not every day, but it kind of depends. Some days that looks like a bigger piece of cake. Some days that's just one square of chocolate. And once we learn to tune back into our body, it has so much wisdom because eating lots of sugar, our body knows that does not have nutrition in it. And our body wants us to be filled with nutrition too. So you'll start to notice that your body does start to crave more of the healthy, nutritious foods if you let go of the diet rules and the good and bad mentality and just let it say, you know, what would actually feel best to me right now?
Yeah, this is what I'm thinking right now. I'm thinking my
Mhm.
poor, deprived kids, because they probably haven't been offered dessert in the last 10 years. Hmm. It's just never something I ever thought of.
Yeah.
Oh,
And you
well.
know, parenting is such an individual decision for people. And I think some people are so worried about how do I create a healthy relationship with food for my kids? And the truth is, you can do it a million different ways and they can still all end up okay. But I think, you know, modeling how, if I'm going to choose to have the cake, how do we do it in a healthy way? Right. So it's how do we be intentional with it? How do we teach them to mindfully eat it and slow down and notice the textures and the flavors of it? How do we tell them to tune into their body? And what do you notice? How are your energy levels like an hour after eating this cake? And really showing them the impact that the food has on them and just getting really curious about it of, look, the food does different things in our body and how interesting is that? And then they can take that information and use it for themselves.
Yeah, I'll get a little bit nerdy on what you just said, because a lot of people don't chew their food and they don't
Mm-hmm.
really experience it. And when
Mm-hmm.
you're chewing your food, you're actually scientifically releasing enzymes from fruits and vegetables that will help digest the food. And,
Mm-hmm.
the mastication works in all those digestive enzymes and, saliva, and you're preparing the food for your stomach, for your microbiome to eventually take over
Mm-hmm.
and finish the digestion. A lot of people are missing that, which means they're missing absorbing a lot of the nutrients from the foods that they consume because they can't
Mm-hmm.
finish digesting. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great point that you just made as far as experiencing your food when you eat it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And along with that, something else I think is fascinating is that when we're stressed and we have extra levels of cortisol, it increases our blood sugar. And so think about if you are eating a cake in a way that's really stressed and fast and you're not slowing down with it, or you're eating from the TV and you're just piling it in, you're not chewing it, you're messing up with your digestion, but then also your blood sugar is going to raise more than it would with just the cake alone because it's having to prepare for essentially being run over by a lion. And so your body's like, there's stress, things are happening, when really all we're doing is eating a piece of cake in front of TV. But our brain does not know that. It senses fear and danger, especially if we are really nervous around these foods and we have a lot of anxiety around foods. That can cause a lot of stress around them while we're eating them as well, which can also have a big impact on our digestion. And then, like you mentioned, we're not chewing it as well. Our saliva is not breaking it down. And then we have these giant chunks of food entering our stomach, which is really hard for our stomach to digest.
I can relate to it, and a lot of people that are listening to this will understand that Dr. Haley's been under a little stress lately. They're trying to get this aloe vera from our company, and we have been out for 4 months now.
Mm.
And we have a container that's stuck in customs right now, and we're trying to get it out and release so we can make it available to our customers. So Dr. Haley has been under a little stress lately, and yes, he's experienced some of those cortisol levels
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit of weight gain and probably binge eating because it's like, okay, I got to get back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Let me eat something first.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
a whole weird thing that happens in our minds when it's kind of like survival and,
Mm-hmm.
making the things happen in life, the things you got to get done. And it's
Mm-hmm.
challenging, but really our brains think of survival as I have to, eat. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I was going to mention, as far as stress eating goes, obviously there's like a million factors that can impact it. And there's also a million techniques that we can do to soothe ourselves and calm ourselves down. One thing I teach around emotions that I think is pretty unique that I don't see a lot of people talking about is learning to accept how you're feeling too. So, people could say, oh, Dr. Haley, you should, take some more deep breaths and meditate more and maybe, take a day off. And it's like, yeah, okay. But what do I do when my shipment is over there and I got to get it done for the day and I just got to get back to work? On those types of days, we've got to learn that our emotions are not necessarily a problem. And when we can learn to accept them, then life becomes so much easier. And what that can look like is just saying, you know what, I'm feeling a little stressed today, and that's okay. And I think stress is a very broad emotion. I think it's like a umbrella emotion for how we're really feeling. So maybe it's overwhelmed, fearful, anxious. That kind of goes along with fearful. But these more specific emotions, it's like, you know what, I'm feeling a little anxious today, and that's okay. I'm feeling a little fearful that this isn't going to work out, and that's okay. Because then when we accept it, we stop resisting it, and then we can just get through our day being like, I'm okay that I'm a little stressed. Like, I can handle this. I'm going to survive. I'm going to be okay. And then we don't feel the need to escape that emotion with food. Because if we tell ourselves, I'm stressed and I need to figure this out, and it's a problem that I'm stressed right now, then we're looking for a way to fix it. And I'm like, oh, food will make me feel better. Let's just have a little snack. But if we just say, you know what, it's okay. Being stressed is part of being human at times. Everyone gets stressed, and I'm allowed to just sit with this and feel this emotion in my body and move through my day, then it's like I don't need to do anything to change it.
yeah, it makes sense. And I kind of do that. I recognize that, I have these urges right now and, oh, well, it's just, stress mode and that's what's happening. I trust you're enjoying this podcast so that you can enjoy it even more throughout April of 2025. Get $10 off your purchase of $100 or more at HaleyNutrition.com. The coupon code is $10. That's 10BUCKS. You can use this coupon with on sale and already discounted bundled items. All right, enjoy the rest of the show. What are triggers?
Great question. So a trigger is anything that I would say activates an old brain pathway or a current brain pathway. So when you feel triggered, what's actually happening is that brain neural network is lighting up. It's activating and saying, okay, here's what we do. This is our habit pathway. And so we can feel triggered in all sort of areas for all sorts of different things. We can say, oh, I feel triggered when this person said this mean thing to me. Well, maybe that's because our mom said something similar to us as a kid, and that's activating that brain pathway of fear and anxiety. And so that's why we feel triggered. Now with food, a lot of the triggers are the times that we've overeaten and binged before. So you might feel triggered every time it's 5 p.m. and you come home and you open the front door and you see your kids screaming and crying on the floor and dishes in the sink. And maybe that's the thing that activates that brain pathway for you to say, oh, I need a snack before I start dinner. And that's every time you see, okay, open the front door, I see my house, now I want food. It can be a certain time. So it's like maybe every time you see 2 p.m. on the clock and it's time for your break for at work, and then you think, oh, it's time for a snack, because you've had a snack every single day at 2 p.m. So your brain feels triggered to go through that brain pathway. Now, triggers are not a bad thing. I actually did a podcast on this recently on my podcast, where a lot of people think, okay, if I'm triggered by, stress, or I'm triggered when my mom says this thing to me, I should just eliminate that trigger. I should tell my mom she needs to change herself and stop saying this thing to me, or I need to make sure that I'm never stressed and I get all my ducks in a row. And those things can be helpful, but what we actually need to do is we need to feel triggered and learn to take a different brain pathway, because this is what's going to rewire our brain. We don't want to just hide inside of a cave for the rest of our life and hope we don't get triggered. And this is what I found for me was actually the approach in therapy that I found kind of unhelpful, which is, okay, if you're triggered by this, how can we avoid those triggers or just manage them, versus how do we overcome them and make sure that they're just never triggering again and you never have to live in fear and make your life really small so you don't encounter these things. So what this might look like, it's, let's say, your mom is talking about how she started Ozempic and she's losing all this weight, and that triggers you because then you want to diet and you're thinking, oh, maybe I should do it. And you feel triggered to, I guess this would be the habit of dieting. Dieting can be a habit too. So maybe it's going down the old brain pathway of dieting. What you'd want to learn is, well, how can I shift my thoughts and mindset when my mom says, oh, I'm dieting and I'm doing Ozempic and it's great and you should do it, to say, you know what? That's great. My mom is on her own path and I'm going to stay on my path. Because then when you learn to think a different way about it, then you're going to stop feeling triggered. Or another example, let's say a certain food triggers you. Mine used to be Nutella. Anytime I had Nutella in the house, I would just go crazy on it. Because in the past, anytime I had Nutella, I would binge on it. It was like, sticking the spoon in, or, for being honest, like sticking my finger in over and over and just eating it out of the jar. And so when I saw Nutella, I felt triggered because my brain was having a memory of how I used to eat this food. So I had to learn, I'm going to today take an apple and I'm going to eat it with the Nutella, and my brain is going to feel triggered. It's going to say, you should binge on this, you should eat more. And I'm going to learn to sit with this emotion and I'm going to feel it through. It's going to be uncomfortable at first, but when I get out of it, then my brain is learning, oh, we don't binge on this food anymore. We now have a new relationship to this food. And so it makes it the next time I have Nutella, I'm less triggered to binge.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know a lot of people do have that kind of relationship with certain foods. And, this was meant to be used this way, but, that chocolate syrup bottle, I just want to pop the cap open and squirt it down my throat.
Mm-hmm.
Or, the jar of honey, rather than put a teaspoon in my tea, I just want to stick the spoon in there and eat it off the spoon.
Mm-hmm.
But I like that reprogramming, saying, no, this is what I do with that particular trigger. And then your brain eventually gets used to that.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm curious what some of your influences were to help you understand this. Did you have certain books that you read or programs you took online? How'd you learn about all of this?
Great question. So one book that was really pivotal for me is a book called Brain Over Binge by Kathryn Hansen. And Kathryn Hansen was one of the first people who really identified this idea that our brain forms habits and urges around food. She actually took this concept from a book, I think it's called Rational Recovery, that talks about how to overcome these urges around alcohol, and she applied it to food. And so that was the first book that I read that I was like, oh my gosh, I don't just have to get my entire life in a row in order to stop binge eating. I just need to learn how to deal with this one thing, which is how to sit with my urges. And when I do that, I can literally rewire my brain. So that was a really big influence for me. And I actually did coaching with her. I went through her program back in, I think, 2016. So it was a while ago. But it was so helpful for learning these urges, but I still didn't feel like I had a good grasp on how can I have a healthy relationship with food. I was still kind of like, all right, but how do I sit down and eat a birthday cake and not panic over it and want to go eat the whole cake again? And so I kind of got a hold on my urges. I stopped binge eating for a bit, but I was still struggling with my relationship with food. And I was also struggling with this constant idea of I want to lose more weight. And when we have this constant thought of lose weight, then there's this constant feeling in the background of I should restrict. I should cut things out. I should eat less. I should eat less. And that can, again, lead to the binge eating. So for that, I had to do more work on like making sure I was truly stopping dieting. And then I had to learn how to eat these foods in moderation. And that was kind of a trial and error process, just from the hundreds and hundreds of articles and blogs and podcasts that I listened to of how do I change my relationship with these foods and eat them in moderation. I also did a weight loss coaching program with a woman named Cookie Rosenblum. She's actually retired now, but I ended up working for her as a weight loss coach myself after I went through her program for a couple of years. And that's where I really learned the coaching side and the mindset of how our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all related and how important it is to look at our thoughts around food. And then I later got certified in coaching our unconscious brain, because a lot of time our unconscious brain has blocks around it feels unsafe for me to change this habit, that this habit is serving me on some level and I'm scared to let it go. And a lot of times this can come up with urges. I remember thinking, I literally feel like I'm going to die if I don't eat right now. Like, that's how strong my urges felt. And that was because my brain was literally interpreting, if I get rid of this habit, I might die, because it's connected to food. And so our brain's really sensitive to that. So something that I learned to do is really showing my brain that I'm not going to die, that these are just thoughts going through my head that are creating sensations in my body. I can handle some thoughts. I can handle some sensations. And that also, just because we have a thought doesn't mean it's true. We can think I need to eat food right now, but that's not necessarily true, because our body can go a month without food most of the times. I'm not suggesting that we try to do that, but to show our brain logically, hey, we're going to be okay. We're safe to not eat this food in this moment. And one thing that I'm going to give you for the show notes is my guided urge audio that will help listeners get through these urges. So these times where it feels a little scary to sit with this urge, or I'm not sure how to get through it. Instead of just telling you to go like drink a glass of water, chew gum, which is not always like the most helpful thing, I'm going to walk you through a visualization process that's going to show your brain the fast forward button. Because a lot of times we think, that cake sounds so good, but we don't think about, well, how's that cake going to feel in 5 minutes from now when it's done? And I've eaten 3 pieces of it and I feel really shitty in my body and I have no energy for the rest of the day. We can use visualization to fast forward that process, and we see, okay, this is what happens if we eat the cake, and what happens if we don't eat the cake, and we get to feel really proud of ourselves because we're changing our brain and we're changing our habits and going into that celebration mode of feeling really proud of ourselves. That's what we want to imagine instead.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite techniques, is thinking about how I'll feel. How is this going to affect my sleep, my energy levels, my focus? And, it's really easy for me to say no to coffee after, 8 a.m. It's really easy for me to say no to any chocolate throughout the day, because it's going to interfere with my sleep. I'm not going to feel good, or it's going to make me feel jittery. So I like that. And I'll make sure that there's that particular link in the show notes, in the description, on the blog page, wherever you're consuming this content. For sure, we'll have a link to that so people can get that. You have a lot of testimonials on your website, on YouTube. Tell me one of your favorites.
Yeah, I think every client's journey is so unique and special and beautiful in its own way. But I have a moment for one of my clients that really sticks out to me on many occasions. And this is someone who has dieted for her entire life, since she was like 10 years old. And she's spent thousands and thousands of dollars on coaching and programs and trying to lose the weight. And when she started working with me, we were really working for the first time on, maybe I'm not saying we can't try to lose weight, but what if we tried to focus on healing our relationship with food instead? What might my experience of life be like that's different and better? And so one thing we really worked on conquering with her is her fear of peanut butter and having peanut butter in the house. And I think I have her podcast on both YouTube and my podcast, Become a Confident Eater. This is Ginger's story, so you can listen to the full thing there. But she always, every time she had peanut butter in the house, she would eat a third of the jar. She's like, I cannot have it in the house without going crazy on it. And for a few reasons, she had this thought of, well, it's kind of healthy. So like, she kind of gave herself permission to have more of it. And it felt like she could safely binge on it without horrible repercussions versus like eating cookies or something. So she had all these thoughts around it. And what we worked through is, one, really neutralizing the peanut butter, saying it's not bad, it's not too high in calories. We can enjoy it. We can have it every day if we want to. But we went through a visualization process one week together where we had her visualize step by step this process where she imagined herself taking the peanut butter out of the cabinets, taking a spoonful of it, setting it down on her plate with lunch, putting the jar on the lid, putting the peanut butter back in the cabinet, sitting down with it, enjoying it, tasting it, putting the spoon back in the dishwasher, closing the dishwasher, and leaving the kitchen. So notice how specific that was. I didn't just tell her, practice eating it in moderation and mindfully, because that's very abstract to our brain. That doesn't really work so well. But when we can give our brains really specifics, and also, as you mentioned, when we're talking about how the food feels in our bodies, specifics are really good for that. Don't just say, well, I'll feel really good if I eat in moderation. What does that mean? What does feeling good mean? Because that is again, going right over your head. Your brain does not care about that. But if you're like, when I get to have this teaspoon of peanut butter and put it away, and I leave that kitchen feeling energized and light in my body, and I, for the first time, can feel proud of myself after a meal. That is a little bit more specific. And so we went through this visualization process, and she came back to me the next week and was like, oh my gosh, I did it. I took out the tablespoon, I ate it, and then I put it away and I moved on. And she was so proud of herself. And then she worked down to a teaspoon where she's like, I can just have now a teaspoon of peanut butter. I feel completely satisfied. I put my spoon in the dishwasher and I move on. And that was just such a monumental moment for her as someone who really thought that there was just no way I can have peanut butter in my house. I'm just going to binge on it. That's how I've always been. To her saying I can have a teaspoon of it and move on was just so huge for her and had a big impact on her journey, and also made me, really proud of all the work that she did to put in to change her mindset around it.
That's one I can relate to as well. When I was growing up, I loved peanut butter. Now I just go right to the nuts. I guess I make my peanut butter in my mouth.
Yeah.
Tell me about your podcast. Is it mostly you, or do you have guests on? And what can people expect to learn by tuning into your podcast?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So my podcast, Become a Confident Eater, I do mainly solo episodes. I sometimes do have special guests that come on. I recently had someone who specialized in how eating disorders form and how they grow up with us and change as we get older. So that one was a really interesting one. But I do a lot of solo episodes. And I created my podcast because I wanted to have short little tidbits. My episodes are usually 10 to 20 minutes because I want you to be able to just pop them in and get a really big insight for your week and learn how to navigate forward. And I'm also creating something right now. I'm sure by the time this episode comes out, it will be on my podcast, where I've started creating worksheets for every episode so you can actually take action from them. So I'm creating a podcast worksheet bundle where you can get all of the worksheets that go along with the podcast so you can really start to take action on them too, because it's really great when we can listen to them and we can have these tips and insights and these little nuggets throughout our week of how to stop binge eating and overeating. But unless we actually take action and apply them to our life, they sound great in the moment, and then we might forget about them as the week go on. So I created these worksheets. And then, of course, in my program, I go to the next level of going through my 6 pillars to stop binge eating and become a confident eater. And so that's where we really do the deeper work and go in a more step-by-step format to reprogram our brain to be this normal, natural eater.
Okay. And if someone wants to get a hold of you and maybe have a consultation, what's the easiest way to do that?
The easiest way is probably just to go to my website, theconfidenteater.org. I do offer a free consultation. So if you've listened to this episode and you're like, oh my gosh, this is me, I can totally relate, I would recommend booking that consultation. We can go over your goals together and really understanding why these eating habits are coming up for you and your plan to get out of them.
Well, I think this discussion has been great. I think I have a few tips that I can apply to my own life already. I might have to listen to this podcast again and really imprint them in my brain and use them. Is there anything that you wish I had asked that we should have talked about that would be beneficial?
Yeah, I think just this idea that our brains are not broken, that you are not broken, and it's just a message I really want to get across again, is that these are just habits, that there's nothing wrong or shameful about eating more food than our body needs. I think a lot of times we're taught that the worst things we can do is overeat and gain weight. And we live in such a fat phobic society that it makes a lot of pressure on ourselves of what our body needs to look like for both men and women. And so I think just understanding that, yes, we might be eating some more food than we need. And I am not a perfect eater either, that it's okay to sometimes overeat as long as we are mindful of it and we get back up after. We don't stay stuck in it for days beating ourselves up. That you don't need to be a perfect eater to be a healthy eater and to have a healthy relationship with food and a healthy life. But yeah, I just really want to reinforce that, like, no one is broken. You have nothing wrong with you. You've just got into some habits, and habits are 100% changeable no matter how long you've had them for or where you're at with them now.
That's a good word. I like that. Amber, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This has been great. I think I probably have other things I want to talk about, and it might even make for another podcast. Would you be open to joining me for a future episode?
Absolutely.
Great.
I know sometimes questions come up, and I'm sure you probably have a way for listeners to connect with you, so they could also put in questions too, and I'd be happy to answer them.
I think I'll get a lot of questions to my email box from this one, so great. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Amber.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode today on The Dr. Haley Show. Make sure to hit subscribe on whichever platform you are listening to this. If this episode made you think of someone, go ahead, take a screenshot, and share this exact episode with them. You can catch the show notes for this episode on www.drhaley.com. If you want to geek out with Dr. Michael Haley on other radical health topics, be sure to check out his YouTube channel, where he posts exclusive video content. All the details are at www.drhaley.com, and we can't wait to hang out with you on the next episode.